Welcome back to the Growing Pains podcast. I, of course, am your host, Alyson Caffrey. And today I'm sitting down with Eleanor Beaton. Eleanor and I met in a mastermind and just really hit it off right away. She's super passionate about helping women entrepreneurs. And I thought that perhaps we could bring her on the show to give some incredible pointers, which ultimately ended up happening. Our conversation was amazing. I love also the opportunity to bring a little bit more seasoned moms with older kids onto the show, especially because as you guys know, my littles are 2 and 4. A lot of you guys listening have young kids at home. And, it's always so great to hear from the perspectives of moms who are a little bit farther along than us in business, a little bit further along than us in motherhood, and really kind of I think what Eleanor kind of gave to me on the show, which I hope she gives to you, is some confidence and some retrospective on maybe what she would have done differently or things to pay attention to. Of course, not every single thing is going to apply to your unique situation. However, I do actually feel like it's super helpful to just hear, what folks would have done differently. So Eleanor is an award-winning entrepreneur, author, and business coach who's been recognized internationally for her work advancing women entrepreneurs and leaders. She's been married to Leon, her husband, for 22 years, and together they have 2 teenage boys, Noah and Tobias. She's the founder of Safi Media, a coaching and education company on a mission to 2x the number of women founders who sustainably scale past $1 million in revenue by 2030. Like, big mission, guys. Safi Media is recognized as one of the world's top coaching companies, specializing exclusively on providing targeted support to the roughly 5% of women founders who generate between $200,000 and $2 million in revenues per year. This gal is a powerhouse, you guys. You can feel it in her energy. If you're watching this on video, you can see it in her mannerisms. And I'm so excited to bring Eleanor's expertise to you and have you hear a little bit more about her story. I'll see you guys inside. Eleanor, welcome to Growing Pains. I'm so excited to have you.
I'm so looking forward to this whole conversation.
So we connected in Dan Martell's Elite Mastermind, correct?
Yes.
And what an incredible community, right? I just love being surrounded by people who want to be better, right? Who are just committed to the pursuit of being better in any way, right? Like in their physical and their spiritual, in their business and their parenting and all those things. So I felt like we got to connect with so many incredible people from that community. Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, the concept of personal excellence is really, really powerful. And the people who are drawn to the pursuit of personal excellence are people I want to be around. Everyone was like, Alyson is you need to talk to, she is the person for all things operations and really helping you streamline. And that was one of the aspects of your amazing reputation in the group.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And Dan has been a fantastic client for years. We've managed all of their internal knowledge and worked with them on all of their SOPs. And so it's just been such a gift to kind of see both sides of it, right? See the behind the scenes of SaaS Academy, the business that he's built, and then also to be a part of the mastermind and be able to get to know him in a different way, because he's always been the SaaS coach. He's always been the guy who's behind the scenes of these massive growing SaaS companies that are, having these multi-million-dollar exits. And then he starts talking about how to have a house manager. And you're like, what? This is wild. And then it just inspires so much in you. And you're like, hey, I could do this, right? He's got such an approachable way. So I also loved that group. I think it helped me so much too as a mom, which I'm sure we can get into here. But Eleanor, for the folks listening who don't know you yet, can you tell us a little bit about your business and the family that you have at home?
Yeah. So I'm a mom. I've been married to my husband for 22 years. And that's Leon. Thank you. And we have 2 sons. So we have Noah, who's 18. He just graduated from high school. And we have Tobias, who is 14. He just is starting high school. I live in Eastern Canada. I combine that, and really they've seen the birth and growth. This is my second company. So I've been an entrepreneur the entirety of my kids' lives, which has been fascinating to see what they take away. And I've got some cute stories about that. But my company's called Safi Media. My husband is my business partner, and we are a training and education company on a mission to double the number of women entrepreneurs who sustainably scale to $1 million in annual revenue by 2030. That's our mission. We really, really believe that women entrepreneurs are key to advancing a model of growth that actually nourishes the planet, where there's a huge focus on sustainability, on holistic growth, on creating growth that actually nourishes, the people who work for it rather than depletes. And I think women are fantastic shepherds, of this kind of model of growth. And we have to see it to be it, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Like, we need to see examples of how you can grow sustainably, what that looks like, how it starts to shift how you look at targets and that type of thing. So that's what we do. We have some of the longest running business masterminds for women entrepreneurs going. We've worked with hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs. And we also have this aspect of our business where we actually partner with what we would call people in the ecosystem. So nonprofits, NGOs that are focused on advancing, women entrepreneurs. And so we partner with them to take our programming out to all kinds of interesting entrepreneurs and so on. So that's the business. I love it. We have a team of 8 people, and yeah, it's a huge part of who I am, being an entrepreneur.
I love that so much. It feels like you give so much opportunity and give so much back to your community. Tell me more about why female entrepreneurs, because I agree with you. I think that from a service perspective, some of the women I've even just been able to connect with since I've kicked up this show 2 years ago, right? Like, there is such a service, a heart for service, right? There's such a heart for, making things better than you left them. Yeah, why women entrepreneurs?
So when I was growing up, I grew up in Eastern Canada. We immigrated to Canada from the UK. My mom is originally from the Fiji Islands. And so when she came to Canada with my dad got a job as a professor. And my mom had trained as a teacher in the Fiji Islands, and her teaching credentials weren't recognized. So it would be a while before she could redo her degree, redo her training certificates to get back into the working world. Not only that, the culture is entirely different, and so they decide as a family that she is going to take a step back. She went from being the main breadwinner when they first met to taking a step back to being a full-time mom. And so she did this up until I was like 17 or 18. So I can remember a moment. So she's driving me to basketball practice. And she and my dad have had a disagreement over how to spend money. And, my dad was an economist, and they call that the dismal science for a reason, and my mom was much more into, hey, let's make some investments. Let's do this, let's do that. And because he was the primary breadwinner, the only breadwinner, what would happen is that when he kind of made a decision about money, that was it. So they had a very equitable relationship in some ways. My mom was like a power lifter. So when people needed help lifting furniture, they would ask her, not him. You know what I mean? Which is so funny. But she, I could witness this financial disempowerment. And I remember she was driving me to basketball practice. I'd had this disagreement, and she's like, Eleanor, money is power. Always make your own. And an entrepreneur needs a burning desire. You have to have this pit, this fire in your belly to really create and sustain a growing business. And that mission, is at the heart of what I do. Really, it's about financial empowerment and agency and independence for women is like this huge, and that has been the thread, through all of the work that I've done. But I have found, I think that one of the currencies of success that is so important to women is freedom and independence. I think because we've been so cultured and indoctrinated to fit certain molds that we're constantly looking for ways we can be free. And I think entrepreneurship is a real way that we can do that. So that's really the genesis of my mission and vision today.
I've found over the years, so my consultancy and agency is going to be 7 years old this year, which is so wild, in a couple of weeks, actually.
Oh.
And we have seen so many stories about that fire in your belly, that passion on your heart. You start the business and it gives you that immediate freedom, right? In the sense that you get to make your own schedule and all those things. And then something like flips. I would say right around the 500,000 to 800,000 in revenue mark. And it can be different depending on industry, in my experience. But all of a sudden, this goes from being a freedom-filled experience to being a job, and you're maybe the worst boss that you've ever, right? Like, it just feels so taxing. So do you find that aside even from the financial piece of the pie, there's this other piece of the pie where folks are really struggling to keep all of the balls in the air. And from a scale perspective, we've seen operations be one of the biggest bottlenecks, not necessarily finances.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I think to move from like 500,000 to 5 million, you basically have to in many ways you become a different person.
Mm.
You know, you become a person who is exceptional and highly skilled at doing, to being able to really work through people, which I
Mhm.
think means renegotiating your value to the company. It means massive trust. You know, it's a real exercise in personal development, and I think the place where it manifests is through operations.
Mm.
And what I've seen is like the ability, are you willing to see it? Are you willing to start creating, putting in place operations and systems that are capable of scaling? But then most importantly, are you willing to actually trust those things?
Mm.
And so yeah, I've definitely seen that. We see it all the time. Like our sort of sweet spot in the work that we do is working with people from 200K to 2 million.
Mm.
Right. And
Yeah.
yeah. And so they absolutely, go through that challenge. And I've been there, and it's very scary because you start to realize, like, oh my God, like I wouldn't hire me.
Mm.
I wouldn't hire me now. Like I wouldn't, I wouldn't. Anybody who knows like a hardcore entrepreneur, that's what they want to do. They're not going to change. These are leopards that will not necessarily change their spot. So I'm like, I'm in it. And the only way to the other side is through it. So yeah, it's fortifying, bracing journey, is it not?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I always say too, like entrepreneurship is like one of the best backdrops for self development, like in the entire world. And I think motherhood is either a very, very exact or close second to entrepreneurship. I think you can, in certain seasons, similar to entrepreneurship, you can get your footing, you can feel like you've got lots of momentum, you can feel like you're firing on all cylinders. And then all of a sudden, a new circumstance or kiddo changes or the market changes or you lose an employee, like something happens. And then all of a sudden, what was good enough then is suddenly not good enough. And we have to change, we have to iterate, we have to pivot. Do you find that like mom business owners like have a higher capacity for these types of pivots than perhaps our male counterparts?
Yeah, that's a great question because the reality is that I spend so little time around our male counterparts. So in many ways, all I know is moms and women and who we are and how we do things. But I've absolutely found, both motherhood and entrepreneurship can be incredibly humbling. And there's this relentlessness to both. It's like this, you're never done. And I can remember
Mm-mm.
feeling it when my kids were really little, and you're just trying to get them to sleep. And then you get that, you get this routine that everybody's talking about. They're like, oh, my kid's in a routine. And then finally you get in a routine and then something happens. Somebody comes over for dinner unexpected, or something happens to interrupt the routine, and you realize how the nature of the human condition is one of continuous evolution and change.
Yeah.
And so to me, what I have seen when it's done well is that I think motherhood and entrepreneurship and our best expression of both, we actually become major stoics. So we learn how to perceive things with a lot of awareness, patience, and a longer view. We learn how to take correct action because we don't have all of the time in the world. And we also really learn how to endure.
Mm. That's super interesting. I was saying to you just before we press record that patience is probably, I mean, I've been working on my patience. And you know what? Similar to motherhood and business ownership, I don't know if I'll ever be done. I don't think I
Yeah.
was born with a natural well of patience. And I'm always exploring and finding ways to try to grow that runway, right? Or lengthen that runway of things that I really want to create in the world or things that I want to do and be able to be patient with them, but also not use patience as an excuse to not execute, right? So to like really
Yeah.
try to ebb and flow with that. And I'm really, really interested in those seasons of life, right? If everything about like the human condition, right, is the fact that we're just always, kind of working through change and,
Mhm.
we've got this business that's constantly changing and this home environment that's constantly changing. We, right, are constantly and honestly always changing. When do we know when we're in a season where it's totally great to just put the blinders on and put your foot on the gas? And when do we know when it's a season to just kind of let things flow and to be patient and
Mhm.
trust in some of those systems that we've already built for ourselves?
All I can speak about on this, is my experience, and I've been through a bunch of different seasons of motherhood, and I'm sure I'll be through, I'll just continue to go through like a whole bunch more. What I have learned about patience, because there is, right, like there's this nature. In order to actually be a successful entrepreneur, you need to have a high sense of urgency. You just have to have a very high sense of urgency. And I actually think that that's what most of us have, that urgency. It's like the grain of sand that produces the pearl. It's never comfortable,
Mm,
so as an entrepreneur, there's a big part of you that is never going to feel comfortable. There's an inner restlessness that is a part of this striving and growing. And I think that there's been, lately there's been this big movement that striving is wrong. You should just
mm,
accept yourself. No, you respect yourself, you know? But if I just accepted everything, yeah, I do accept, but it does, a part of accepting yourself as an entrepreneur is understanding, I think, that this restlessness that we feel, this yearning for something bigger, better, different, new, sometimes we're taught that that is wrong. You know what I mean? And it certainly feels uncomfortable, but that discomfort is the thing that creates massive value and transformation in the world, and is the entrepreneur's burden to live with that.
mm,
To live with this just restlessness, and it's like, and it's a real thing, and it can be really challenging. I remember as a mom, especially as a young mom, when I was a newer entrepreneur, when I wasn't as confident in my skills to execute, when I just wasn't as confident generally, because you really do get confident, as you get older. I'm 46, and like when I compare the confidence that I have today to what I had when I was 36 to what I had when I was 26, it's much more. You know what I mean?
mm,
It's much more of a grounded confidence, I would say. But when I look back on earlier years or earlier versions of myself, what I would tell myself is, hey, that restlessness, it's okay. You can allow it. There's nothing wrong. This is part of who you are. You can accept it. It's a part of
mhm,
what is going to spur you and energize you to keep going. But what I would also tell my younger self, I think, what I didn't grasp is I didn't grasp the detrimental value of short timelines. So that short timelines are for incremental changes and shifts, and massive transformation when you allow yourself the gift of longer timelines and you just have faith that the changes and transformations you want to see will happen if you're willing to give them time. I think that would have, I do have regrets about when my kids were younger.
mm,
100% I do. 100% I look back and I see, I was so caught up in my restlessness and wanting to make really massive shifts in a really short time period that it did 100% impact my personal ability to be present. And it's interesting because you do reckon with those when they're older, when they leave the house, you know what I mean? Which is where mine. And
mhm,
so for me, I'm in a season where I'm sort of, I've done a ton of work over the last year of really working through that, and I'm sure there's tons of parents out. I don't think I'm treading this alone, but just looking back and being like, you know what? Um, I wish I had, and it wouldn't have necessarily changed anything. I just would have given myself the gift of allowing for a longer runway, because it's going to take the time it takes. You know what I mean?
mm,
I think I would have given myself that gift. I have thought about that a lot, especially again as my oldest one has graduated from high school, and by the time they graduate from high school, you have spent 80% of your time with them that you will over the course of your entire life.
mm.
Yeah.
The sad and scary sounding statistic.
It is. And it should
Honestly.
be. It is. You know what I mean? I'm like, I wish I'd heard that earlier. Even though I think I probably did and I just blocked it out because I was busy.
So what, Eleanor, I think is like thinking my kids are 4 and 2. I have 2 little boys, like if you were to come and spend a day as me with
Yeah.
your 2 little boys at those ages, I know
Yeah.
yours are about 4 years apart in age. What would you have done differently? Like day to day, right? Because I think a
Yeah.
lot of times too, like we look back and I look at my day 2 days ago, right? I had a super busy Monday. And of course I would have loved to be more present,
Yeah.
right? But like, what does that look like exactly? Because I
Yeah.
think for me, and I am definitely self-identifying in your characterization of restlessness. Like that
Yeah.
is me. I'm thinking about work 24/7. If I'm not
Same.
thinking about work, I'm thinking about the kids and stuff that we want to
Yeah.
grow in our personal life, or like some goal I have for my health, or like my personal fitness, or something like that. Like it's just a constant, like it's almost like a teleprompted list, like running in
Mhm.
the back of my brain of all
Totally.
these things I want to do. And so I've also been, when I say patient, like kind of doing, or at least trying to do what you're describing, right?
Yeah.
Giving myself a longer runway for that. But what might a day or even a week of time, right? If you were going back, you're in a person like myself,
Mhm.
my shoes, like, what does that look like giving the extension on that runway and being able to be more present?
Yeah. So what I would do, I know exactly what I do because I've thought about this. And it's like, I don't know, I can remember sometimes my mom would be like, you can just relax. And it's like I couldn't even hear. I'm like, I don't even know, and it's like there is a part of this, it's who we are. And there's so many gifts for our kids in it. And and it's also like there's this, the world requires, like it's such a gift to the world to have people like that, like what you're
Mhm.
describing, but what I would say to myself I would say this, sweet girl, you can 100% trust that you will definitely create everything that you want to create, and that you're dreaming of. And it is one trust in your ability to make it happen. And what would be different if you really absolutely, absolutely trusted that? What would you do differently just right now? And like a little bit of sort of checking in around that and allowing myself not just to know that intellectually, but to actually feel it. And I think what that would have done would have been to just take a little bit of the pressure off and allow me to have moments of family life that were a little bit more pure, just a little bit, didn't quite have the weight of my entrepreneurial side. You know what I mean? And that to
Mm.
just allow just a little bit more lightness and levity in those moments, because I don't think my kids would have noticed or felt a difference. But what I really do see is for me, there was so much joy there's so much joy always to be had in the journey,
Mm.
and it's hard. I can find that, I can access that joy a lot more now because I have so much more time. Like, oh my God, I can't even, like, the moms who have little kids, because there's like little kids are awesome. They're so cute and adorable, and they're just like your little chickens. You know what I mean? They're just like in the nest with you. But I remember there's also like this tediousness. Okay, we have to, let's get up. Okay, I'm going to help you get dressed. I'm going to help you have a bath. I'm going to help you go to the bathroom. Now I'm going to put you in your high chair. I'm going to strap, like, it's step after step after step. And each step is,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? It's like so all in. So you
Yeah.
really don't actually have a lot of time. So you naturally have to think about stuff while you're doing that stuff because you're doing stuff for hours every day.
And
It
it never stops. Yeah, it
never
literally
stops.
never stops.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve and I call it Groundhog's Day. You ever see
Yes,
with Bill
I do.
Murray? Yeah, it's
100%.
Groundhog's Day. It's
Every
every
day.
day. I mean, it's
Every
the
day.
same thing. I mean, the routine is, just incredibly impactful, of course. But yeah, it's the same stuff and the same sequence. And the same
Yeah. But you know what nobody ever talks about so I started studying, we were talking about this. I was doing this sort of like research into the gender wage gap. And she actually was the first woman economist to win the Nobel Prize, and she just won it this year. Her name was Dr. Claudia Golden, for her work, around this. And so her sort of seminal book is called Family and Careers or something like that, and it's about women like us who are combining work and family and what that's like. And one of the things that she really sort of kicks off with is just how much time and energy family life requires. Like it used to be for many, many, many years, a single full-time job, raise a family. And now it's like a part-time job for people who have full-time jobs. And I think that would be this other thing that I would tell myself, which is like, hey, you know what? Like what you're doing is phenomenal. And you're doing these two jobs that both require massive amounts of output and energy. And anything that you can do to release the pressure valves a little bit is going to be really helpful. And remember, most business books are written by men, period. Most books about ambition, about achievement, about systems, about sales, about marketing, about success, about what we should do, about principles for how to live your life, about timelines. The vast majority are written by men who are not us, who have a very different life experience. And so factor that in when you think about what you want to do, what's realistic, what's possible, how, that's what I would also kind of tell myself. I still tell myself that to this day.
I think it's so hard because I was actually just talking with a mom on the podcast a little bit ago too, and we were talking about how much pressure that we put on ourselves,
Yeah.
right? So in terms of just being able to keep everything together and keep the business afloat and keep the house clean and be the sole cook and provide
Yeah.
all these meals and all these different things, and it's just so much pressure. And I think that a lot of times too, when it comes to the dads in the home, moms sometimes don't actually give dads enough. Like they don't
Really.
actually trust dad, or they don't learn to trust dad or help dad understand what exactly they need. And so I think moms oftentimes they shoulder a lot of this extra like
Yeah.
self-inflicted burden
Yeah.
where like I remember the first time I was like, My husband's going to do bath. And like, that's how that's going to go. And I remember being nervous.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking about it. I was like, why am I nervous? He's not gonna like he's gonna be fine. Like the kids aren't gonna get hurt. The
Yes.
bath is gonna get done. They're gonna be fine. And so I remember talking about this with another mom like years ago when I had first had my son Frank. And I was just like, what is that? I don't understand
I know.
like what that is. And it's just something in us, I think, that almost like disallows dad to be like involved in a lot of ways. And I'm really proud that early in our parenting journey together, Steve and I have really found a really nice mix
Yeah.
of responsibilities. And it's not always 50-50. And transparently, sometimes he takes the lion's share. Sometimes I take the lion's share
Yeah.
of the child rearing and everything. And I just think it's so important to be able to early on to like have these conversations with your spouse or your partner and just be like, listen, this isn't a one-sided situation. This isn't an 80-20, right? This is an actual partnership in this way. And I think it's hard sometimes for moms to let go of the reins, like let
Yeah.
go of that extra 30%.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't agree more. I remember like reading the book Lean In, which sort of
Mm,
fell out of favor, but was in favor for a long time. But my
it's a good
favorite
one.
part, it's a really good one. My favorite part of the book is where she says, you know what? Honestly, one of the most important factors in a woman's career is whether she chooses to have a partner and who that partner is.
Totally.
And for me, like my husband was definitely more of the primary parent after my kids were like 4.
Mm,
When they were little, when they were and I had a full-time nanny when my second son was born for the first 4 years. So it was
mm.
like I was never doing it fully on my own. And I have so much respect, for people who are combining all of it, not to mention single parents. Like, oh my God, I don't even,
How do they even do it,
how do
honestly?
you even do it?
I don't
You're
know.
heroes.
I
But your
don't know.
point, like I think your whole thing around these conversations, they're so critical. So here's something for you. One time I was interviewing for my EA role, and one of the women, she'd been a lifetime EA and she had worked with like high level executives, both men and women. I was like, I'm super curious. Have you noticed any differences? I'm always just curious about gender differences if they do exist. She's like, oh yeah. I was like, well, tell me. She's like, well, the men were very happy to fully delegate. They
Mm,
delegated more, they delegated faster, they delegated, you know what I mean? And the women were much more likely to not fully delegate, to take longer to be able to trust to delegate, and to just certain things they would never delegate. And I was so, well, kind of unsurprised by that, but I think it, you know, but it
same.
also, right? It's a little bit like, I agree with you. I think sometimes if we really want to have both of those things, I think motherhood can teach us this great leadership lesson, which to your point is about, hey, can you let go? Are you willing, to let this go and to allow other people to actually help you? Because
Mm,
if not, it's going to be really way harder than it potentially needs to be.
yeah. It's interesting. I find that when it comes to men and delegation with the clients I've worked with at operations agencies specifically, they want it done right. And women want it done right for them. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. That's so cool. Yes.
Yeah. So like I feel like and I think this goes back to like how we're wired as like human beings even. Like men, their number one driver, right, is just to spread their seed. That's like
Yeah.
what they do. And women are not like that. We have to be like better trusts of intuition. We have to be better judges of character.
Yeah.
And I think that helps us kind of craft this, I don't know, these specifications, if you will, or these preferences. And I think we know what is right for us and what is not right for us really more intuitively sometimes than some of our male counterparts. And I think when I look at women who've grown big old businesses, they're just like, I ran this in what felt good to me, what felt right to me, and what the direction was that felt like it was the next best direction. And a lot of times I see men scaling on systems, right? Stuff that's
Yes.
worked for other people that they've been able to implement, which is both ways are great
They
ways.
are. Yeah.
And I do find that, I mean, you brought up the books earlier. I find that men find success in like swiping other systems and things that work. And women are tweaking some of those, right? Whether it's to be more personable or whether it's to be more authentic to who they are or keep their voice involved. And so it is really interesting to see how that's shown up in parenthood and in business ownership, because I really do think that when it comes to delegating, I mean, it's the same thing for me. I have an executive assistant. She is wonderful. And I still do some of the very critical things, like administratively in my life, just because I want to pick them. I want
Yeah.
to do it. Like my flights, for example.
Yeah.
I was
Same.
like, I want
I
to
don't
see the
want
flights.
anybody to exactly. I wanna see him. I wanna see him. There's
I
no
want to choose it.
way.
Yeah, and it takes me like 15 minutes. I'll look through the flights.
Yeah.
I'll take like sometimes if it's like a really obscure city, it'll take me a second, but I want to see the dang flight. I want to book the flights
I
and I
wanna
want to
see
pay
the
the
dang
flights.
flights. You know what? I feel so seen. Feel so seen because 'Cause I'm like, yeah, who lets people pick their flights? Like that there's a lot
Not
there.
me.
Oh, you need to make a
No.
system. No, I don't wanna make a system.
Mm-mm.
I don't even see how this system could ever be fail proof. I'm, totally fascinated by what you said. Yeah, I'm totally fascinated by it. And it's interesting too, that and how that shows up and, so you get to make the bed that you lie in, and so it's like, hey, what do we want? We want it to look a certain way. We want it to be a certain way. And that's totally okay, which means that we're going to have some custom requirements around it.
Mm.
Yeah, I love your way of looking at that. I love that experience. Yeah.
There's so many differences and there's so much to say that we don't know, I guess, right? Because
Yeah.
even in this next season, our family moved from Pennsylvania to Colorado. We're feeling all the newness. There's like, Q4 is upon us, right? There's lots of like pages turning and new chapters starting and all of those proverbial things. And I keep thinking about, okay, what support do I need now versus what I needed, a year ago, right? When Jack, my son, my younger son, he was a year old, right? Like he was tiny.
Yeah.
And that is a very different season. And we're not in a totally new season within parenting, but there are still some changes and some differences. So what do you see about your, motherhood and business kind of mix now that maybe was different when the kids were little?
Yeah. Oh, I love this question. So for me right now, and again, I sort of alluded to it. And you know what's so funny? I was talking with somebody. I don't know what I thought about middle age. when I was younger. I guess I just kind of thought that it was like downhill.
Or just it was forever away, right?
Forever
Probably it just felt
away,
so far.
right? And just kind of, but it's a really, really fascinating phase, and we have like people like J-Lo, you know what I mean? And all over Instagram, there's all of these like midlife maven influencers who
Oh
talk
yeah.
about
50 is the new 30.
right?
Yeah.
Like talking about how awesome midlife is, how great it is to be an empty nester. And so and I think that's also because the algorithm has completely figured me out. But at this phase, what I'm finding is so interesting, I have way more time, like I said. And I keep, there's so many times when I really notice it because I have a lot of younger moms who their kids are at a different life stage where it's so much more hands-on. So at this stage of motherhood, there's a few things that are going on. One is that I have more time, but I notice like as boys get older, they talk a little less. So there's this presence and awareness, of how I can. So I actually used to love to travel when they were little. I just wanted to get away. I just really enjoyed getting away from like the full on. As they've gotten older, my desire to travel is way less. Like I want to be
Mm.
here, and so that's been really interesting. And I've shifted a lot in my business, and I can be here. I don't need to travel to the same degree anymore. I have more time, both from a family life perspective, but my business is more mature as well. And so what I find this phase is all about is reconnecting to my vision in a more magical way. So you know how
Mm.
like even before kids, when you have time to daydream, it's kind of like the daydreaming when you're a kid and anything is possible. And it's not like in the adrenaline way. Like when my kids were younger, there was just a lot of adrenaline. And, I had a little bit of
Yes.
time I had to make do with, there's just a lot of sprinting happening.
Yes.
And that was great. And that's what it was like. And you have so much, you have scads of energy. You feel like you don't, but you really do, because you're like,
Yeah.
but at this phase, it's like this sort of what I feel is this connection to a much younger version of myself. So this connection to this wonder. And you have it because there's space. So, I can get up in the morning and I can have 90 minutes to 2 hours of total quiet time. My kids make their own breakfast and you know what I mean? I'm not making anybody breakfast. I'm not making anybody any lunch. There's time to read, to journal, to drink coffee. And so there's this big connection, back to vision and sort of, when you're operating that way, there's just this fullness to it. I don't know how to describe it, but it's this sense of wonder and you're like, "Oh, okay. Wow, I have more wisdom than I had. I have more resources and ability, and I'm connected back to my vision in a way." My relationship with my vision is so much different than it was when I just had less time. What's possible? So it's like this, it's like, yeah, it's like the way that I move as a leader feels more intentional.
Mm.
And some people, like I was always a bit of a quick start and I didn't have the kind of operational skill that you have. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of quick initiatives that were happening all the time. Now, I just feel like a much more mature leader and it's very fun in this phase. And you also start to see, I guess it's like, this expression, like the chickens always come home to roost. And so because my kids are older, I can see at this time, I can see, oh, this is so cool. My kids, they both have this like beast mode work ethic. You
Mm.
know, they are really open in talking about money and negotiating, money with their employers. And you know what I mean? Like I see these things coming. And so that's been kind of a cool phase too, when you start to see the fruits of your labors over a period of years.
That's so incredible. I can't wait for, I don't know, inklings or little things that I can see that tell me that the kids see us working hard. Because both my husband and I, we have such a fire in our bellies where, why put off to tomorrow what you could do today type of
Yeah.
people. And
Yeah.
I'm really hopeful that that sticks. I think it will, right? I
Yeah.
trust that it will. And I love the opportunity that you now have, Eleanor, to look at your boys and see some of those observable skills that you and your husband have been able to foster all those years.
Yeah. Totally. And it's little things. I remember with my oldest son, who's now 18, and when he was little, he was really little. And so he'd seen me. I would be speaking, I'd be doing this, I'd be doing that. Like he just kind of, and he asked me, does God have a castle in the sky? And I was like, what? And he's like, does she have a castle? Does she have a castle? And I was like, it was just so cool. You know what I mean? Like his whole concept of what power would look like was
Mm,
feminine, and it was, or that's the form that it took. And it was like, it was so cute. You know what I mean? It was like the sweetest
that
thing.
is
So
so
there's,
sweet.
right. I know.
So sweet.
So sweet.
They say the sweetest things too. Like we're definitely in that 2 to 4, like that these ages right now are so sweet. They definitely still need a lot from us.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of rewards too.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of really sweet, like my younger son Jack, he'll say, Mommy, I love you. Like just in the middle of nowhere. And then he'll go and like give me an air kiss. And I'm just like, melt me down on the floor. I'm like,
That
what
is,
is this?
but then there comes a time where they just don't want you hugging them anymore. Like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They really, like, they'll tolerate it, a little bit of it. And that's the part where it's like, what? I mean, my older one will totally allow me, but my younger one, 14, no. He's, he'll tolerate, but like a big old hug and kiss. No, not so much. And it's like, oh my God, I miss like,
Honestly, that's so sad.
I know.
I think it's so interesting. We've talked about this a lot, like as like we've been raising the kids, my husband and me. And it's tough, but like I think part of being a parent, I love that you said like as you like grow in parenthood and business ownership, like the better leader you become, the more stoic you become.
Yeah.
That really resonated and kind of stuck with me, maybe more than the restlessness, because I definitely
Yeah.
identified with that
Yeah.
too.
The rest is
But
just always uncomfortable.
it's just real.
It's just
That's just what it
real.
is.
I know. It just did.
But like if the whole purpose, right, of having a child is to raise a thriving and capable adult, right? Like if that is the end of it, then like we receive these gifts along the way in the earlier stages because of all the hard work we do, but always it's to this end, right? To have them move out and in some ways move on and start families of their own and be confident leaders in their own homes. And it's really challenging sometimes to even grapple with the timeline and the thought that these kids aren't going to be with me every day for the rest
Yeah.
of my life, right? It's me and my spouse every day for the
Yeah.
rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And like this is such a small fraction. Like we've been married for 10 years, together for almost 15 years. And in 15 years, we're going to be staring down the barrel of college and people moving out and the whole thing. And then it's going to be us again. And so it's really interesting to think about like that time as so like short and precious and all of those things. So I want to ask you, Eleanor, I know that you said that maybe looking back, you'd like do a couple of things a little bit differently, but for like a young mom like me, or for some of the young moms listening, like what encouragement can you give us like in these really tough seasons where maybe we can start to think about slowing down more or think about giving ourselves a longer runway because this time is so short and so fleeting?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, number one, you're probably doing a job that's even 10 times more amazing. You're probably like 10 times even better at it than you think you are, even if you already, you have a good sense of self, you have a good sense of, I suspect because we are so hard on ourselves that probably you would be blown away if you were another person on the outside looking in at how you are doing your best for your kids, and how that they can really feel that. I think there's definitely that sort of piece of it that is huge. I think the idea of all of the extraordinary example that you're setting without realizing, and through building a business and growing things, you're teaching and demonstrating to your child how value is created, and that's just such a powerful, powerful lesson. And I also think like about the resilience of the human spirit, like parenting was never a verb. And I mean, God, like I remember, like as a kid in the 70s and 80s, like we wouldn't necessarily want to go back there, but we do, there is this massive focus on parenting. And we want to do the best we can. And I think that's a really good thing. And I think we're much better as parents than we we ever were. But it's also like, kids are pretty resilient. Like, when you see your kid and they're like, they're storming down a hill and they trip and they have what looks like a catastrophic. I mean, if we felt like that, it would be completely catastrophic. And then they just get up like nothing happened. Hospitalization, like injury, like, like long lasting injury. And they're just completely fine. There's some, I wish children are precious, but they're so resilient also, and I think that's a really good reminder also. Yeah.
My gosh, this has been so fun. I really appreciate all of the wisdom and like looking back and honestly encouragement too. I've drawn a lot of, I don't know, excitement from our conversation just because, I don't know, I also feel very seen, very seen in this conversation. Eleanor, moms listening who want to follow along with you, learn more about what you're doing and, just stay a part of this mission that you and your husband are committed to creating, where can they follow along?
So I'm very present on Instagram, so at Eleanor Beaton. And then I have a show called the Woman Owned Podcast, which is a really fun podcast as well.
That's amazing. I'll link both of those in the show notes. I have a feeling that lots of moms listening are going to want to hear some more Eleanor and hear what you have to say on the podcast. But thank you so much for taking the time to be with me and to chat through some of these things. Anything you want to leave our listeners with today?
I mean, there's a moment when you were talking about your observations in terms of how women delegate and create systems and how men create systems, just some of the patterns that you've seen. That was really powerful. Like, I'm going to be sitting with that for a while because I think it's this way, of appreciating who we are and how we do things. And like, I think that's a really powerful message that we need to bring more, because so often the way that we do things or how we would instinctively do things, we need to see examples of it to normalize it and to also be like, hey, this is a great way. Like doing it this way. It doesn't have to be just applying this blueprint from over here. It can be this. I mean, we are the great creators.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love being able to flex that creativity. I think there's so much power and, I don't want to call them shortcuts, but there's a lot of ways that you can shortcut long periods of time and things that people have learned by like leaning in, having conversations like this, right? Like drawing from folks' wisdom. But I think that ultimately when you bring something to the world, like, an entrepreneurial venture, when you build a business and when you're really crafting solutions for people that you want to serve, it's got to come somewhere. Like that pound of flesh has to come into play. Like you have to be able to cut off a piece of you and put it in there. So I do think, especially for the women I've worked with over the years, we're always constantly, I feel like, trying to reinvent new ways of doing things. And maybe that means that we get slower, quote unquote, results than our male counterparts, because we're not just going to market really fast. But I think that we end up with those businesses that we just keep for a long time because we like them.
And what's really interesting? I remember reading research into innovation, and women are generally more likely to do process innovations. So that's exactly what you know what I mean? Which is like what you're talking about, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
I guess the other takeaway for everybody here is you're not a freak. My big takeaway is you're not a freak if you want to book your own damn flights. Book your own damn flights. You're not a bad leader. You're not a bad leader. Just let that one go.
Oh my gosh. If our coach and friend Dan heard this conversation, he would be like, both of y'all are out of my circle. You are not booking your own flights.
We're like, what? Buy back your own damn time, Dan. We're buying our own flight. You buy back your time. We're buying back our time.
That's right.
And peace of mind by booking your own damn flights.
Oh my gosh. Well, cheers. I will leave it there. Eleanor, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.